And then that comes back, well, we can't quite do that because, we would be negatively impacting our profit and, performance goals there. So, Alan, what can you do to dial that back? And so then we go back and we start to prioritize. So it's not unlike any other budgeting effort, but I think the big thing is, as a leadership team within PAE, we did commit to a budget that we would have available to do these things. And that was actually one of the, in addition to the Chief Innovation Officer role and the innovation group, we did commit that, hey, if we're going to really be serious about this, we got to put our money where our mouth is, and we need to assign some amount of funding to do this stuff.
Yeah. Is PAE structured as an ESOP?
We are not an ESOP. We are privately held, but we're more broadly. Our shareholders are more broad than just the principals in the firm. We allow, as soon as you become part of management at the associate level, we allow people to start buying in, and there's maximum amounts of buy-in at each level. So it's a gradual buy-in if you're growing up within the firm. If you're coming in at a senior level, you can start buying in right away at whatever level you're coming into.
Yeah. Does that structure, does it? That's sort of a softball. That structure must somehow affect the way that the budget for the innovation group is allowed. Hey, I bought into this. I want my shares to be. I want the profit to be. Right, it becomes personal once you've bought into it at that point. So, and I'm always curious about this in ESOPs, which, as you said, you're not. But how does that structure? What kind of conversations does that structure drive when it comes to budgeting for innovation? Because I'm guessing you're not going, oh yeah, well, the ROI on giving 100 hours for that tool that we built. The ROI on that was tremendous. We can talk about ROI. Right. So when we're, when you have many stakeholders, I'm going to say, how does that consideration impact innovation? Is everybody bought in on that, or is there some resistance sometimes?
I have not encountered that resistance yet. We're still a pretty young entity within the PAE organization. I will say that I think people are really supportive and bought in overall. I'm guessing that there's probably a few shareholders within the firm that think, well, I wish we wouldn't be spending money on that. But I think overall there's genuine support, and I think people. Again, my colleagues, I think they see the value of the innovation group, in part because we have really benefited from a brand of being innovative in the industry, and that's part of one of our monikers. It's how we differentiate ourselves from our competitors.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I mean, like you said, I'm glad you brought up brand, right? Because your brand is tied to this idea of sustainability and innovation. And so if you are a shareholder or an employee or wherever you are in the organization, if you're aligned with the brand, then that's going to make sense to you, right? Investing in the innovation. When we get to that idea of ROI, which is, for those of you that are listening, you're in the audio only version. Just imagine I picked up a great big can of worms and now I'm opening it, right? When you talk about ROI for innovation, what does that mean? Or is there even any discussion of it? There's so much gray and so much nuance, of course, around it, but but how it, or if, does ROI come into a discussion of innovation at PAE?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those touch points, Jeff. I like your can of worms
Yeah.
analogy. Yeah, let me think about how to respond to that one. What we have been doing as a litmus test so far when ideas come in front of us as an innovation group is we have our analogy is that we think of ideas as seeds, and we like that because of course we're nature focused and environmentally focused.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
equating ideas to seeds is a natural. So as a seed comes into us, an idea seed comes into us, we first incubate it. And what we do there is we are spending only 10, 20 hours to vet the idea, see if it has legs, see if there's potential.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ideator comes in front of the innovation group. We have, it's not like a judge jury type scenario, but they present what they found, and then we might go to the germination stage, which is where we're willing to spend 100 to 200 hours and then put additional actual dollars if maybe we need a software developer to help us with something or what have you, or maybe we need to physically build something. And as we go through that germination phase, we're doing check-ins periodically to, at these like checkpoints to make sure that as we're moving forward, because a lot of these things are just kind of complete unknowns, is like where this may or may not go. So we're doing these checkpoints periodically just to confirm viability. A really kind of neat example that came in front of us was one of my colleagues on our fire protection group had this idea that the water that gets drained out of fire protection systems in buildings each time that there's maintenance required is wasted, and then just gets dumped to the sewer, and then when they're done with their work, they refill the fire protection system.
It's a lot of water.
That's a lot of water. Yeah. And if you think about them, people doing maintenance on fire protection systems or doing tenant fit out changes in buildings every day, especially in an arid location like Phoenix or Southwest United States in general, what about this idea of collecting all that water and then putting it back into the system when you're done your work? And so we were actually going down a path of maybe even building a test skid where we would have pumps, and we would do a little bit of filtration, put it in this big bladder on the site somewhere. And
cool.
Yeah, so we're thinking, down those lines. But at some point we then also were doing some checks on the cost of water and, the cost of the equipment. And we were doing some calcs, and we just got to a point where, this just doesn't pencil from a financial standpoint. We can't see a path to where, any contractor would do this.
Right.
In part because our water is so darn cheap here in the United States, even though it's scarce in a lot of regions. We felt like the only way to make that idea happen would be if it was part of the code, maybe a code change in a city, for example.
Right.
So we're actually exploring that path, but it's just an example of trying to vet these things out, not only from a technical standpoint, but from an economic standpoint.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're listening to this, you're getting real world right here, right? It's like, does it pencil out or does it not? That makes a lot of sense. And I think, back to your earlier example where the project manager was resisting and you, let's just say you gave them 100 hours out of the innovation budget. That's, every week, in addition to KP and I recording episodes every week, I record episodes with my colleague Frank Lazaro, and we talk about we unpack AI for AEC. We do an episode or two every week, and one of the things Frank's actually got a book about this, and his theory, and he freely admits that he used 12 minutes because the math is easier. But if you save 12 minutes, if you save 12 minutes a day using AI, right, it starts to add up. And yes, the math on 12 minutes over 5 days is an hour, right? That's easier math. But the idea of okay, well, what if we did invest 100 hours from the innovation budget to build this, and then that starts to get amortized over, or the use of that tool starts to get amortized over project after project after project, then we start getting somewhere, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the other ROI calc that we can do as well, is what are the efficiency improvements that we're seeing. Another ROI calc that we have looked at is to look at, or to try to estimate, it's kind of looking at the market share. So it's more around when we're creating a new offering, how many projects might be looking at, say, microgrids, again, back to that example.
Yeah.
And, what kind of fees do we think we could garner over the next 5 years? And do we think that we can be profitable in that offering? And so that's the other ROI calc that we can employ.
Yeah. I love digging into the strategy around that kind of thing too. It's, how does innovation help us compete? How does innovating some new offering help us compete, right? And drive fees, and of course it all comes back to how are we serving our clients or our owners, depending on what it is that we call those people that we work for. But I mentioned AI, and it's, like I said, Frank and I record at least an episode, if not 2 or 3 a week. I guess they don't get, only one a week gets published, but AI is everybody's favorite topic, it seems, of course.
Yep.
When I have really enjoyed this conversation because you've touched on so many different types of innovation and areas of innovation, and some very technical, and some, hey, what if we put a bladder on site? I love that. That's cool. I've got this idea in my head. This is a giant bladder out there filled with the water from the wet sprinkler system. You've mentioned all different types of technology, if you will. How much and how are you exploring AI at PAE?
Yeah, it's definitely been a hot topic for us as well, and kind of very, very appropriately nested into all of our discussions around innovation, and we've really taken that on within the innovation group and across the firm as a whole, frankly. Starting with the enterprise options out there, ChatGPT, Copilot, of course we're exploring that. We're trying to figure out how to best leverage that within our day-to-day workflow. The thing that we're, I think, zeroing in on there is that as much as we might want to roll out those things, there's also a very important investment that needs to happen in the training of the people that are using it, just so that if we're spending dollars on this software or these platforms, and then we roll it out, and then hardly anybody really understands how to really take advantage of it, then again, from an ROI, that's a terrible investment. So we're really trying to follow it up with the training side. And the other area that we've gotten into is trying to look for opportunities where we can get in more from the ground up. And what I mean by that is, actually, I was at one of the Shadow Venture get-togethers 2 years ago now, out in Atlanta, and one of the presenters was a group called Spect AI, and they were out of Stanford, and they had this idea of using AI to pre-process submittals. And if anybody in the business understands the amount of effort that goes into reviewing submittals that come in from contractors, giving our comments and sending them back, it's pretty substantial. And so we've actually been partnering with them, right? Even before they got any real seed money, to help develop their platform and share with them how we would use it within our process and give them suggestions. And we're still working with them to this day. And we're really excited about where they're going with the platform. There's a lot of potential there. So that's another example of how we're trying to interact. The other big one, and this seems to be where a lot of people are spending time these days, is PAE has a lot of data. We have all these projects, over 55 plus years now that we've been in existence. Probably don't have stuff older than 20 years kicking around. That's okay. Still a lot of information. But we have this opportunity now with AI to have it be ingested and then be able to query it and do the similar searches that we're now getting used to with platforms like ChatGPT. So that's probably the next big thing. And I know all the firms, so many firms out there are chasing that one down. So that'll be an exciting one.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Spect AI. They actually, the event that you were referring to was our summit back in 2023. And I think it was towards the end of the summit, I hosted a live demo day, if you will. So
Yeah.
we had founders and co-founders from our incubator cohort that was wrapping up at that particular time. They all pitched from stage. Spect was one of them, the group of students from Stanford. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, after our incubator, they might have gone to Y Combinator, but yeah, fascinating. And very, very useful, I believe. You have been much more involved with them than I have since they graduated out of our incubator. But I love examples like that. We see a lot. We see a lot of things come through our incubator that are asking questions like that. How do we pre-process submittals? How do we, what about specifications? What about taking things down to the permitting office? What about the permitting process and all of those things? Any of those really language intensive tasks? We see a lot of that.
Some of what we're trying to do there, Jeff, is and the way we've talked about it internally is how can we leverage AI to take away the mundane tasks,
Absolutely.
things that just kind of take our energy away.
Yeah.
And then leave room to then innovate, because time is the other barrier for innovation is in a business like ours.
I love that because it's been several years ago now. I had an old interview show, and on that show I interviewed Eitan Sarfardi, who is the founder of SWAP, SWAPP, architect, which is my background for anybody listening that doesn't know that. Architect had built this basically generative AI tool, and they were focused on, I think mainly higher ed and maybe healthcare, but generative AI design tool, right? And This was several years ago that he and I were talking, and so back then, it's, oh my gosh, it's, you're replacing architects. So here's an architect developing this tool that's going to quote unquote replace architects. But he said something very, very similar to what you just said. He said, think of it in terms of AI doing the mundane tasks, doing those repetitive, boring. Do we even need a human to be doing this task? So that you can get back to doing what you were really meant to do, the things that you really excelled at in school and things like that, the things that you're really passionate about. When he said that, I thought, that's a really great way to say it. It's so incredibly similar to the way that you just said it. Is, yeah, why not leverage these tools to do the things that one question would be, do we actually need a human to do that? But they are the mundane, the things that, frankly, it's not getting an engineer out of bed or an architect out of bed in the morning to go do those types of things. So how can we have the AI that doesn't even sleep? How can we have the AI take care of it? Yeah, I love that. I love that approach. As you look out into the future, and you could frame this around PAE, or you could frame it around the AEC industry in general. But what's the biggest barrier to innovation that you see out there into the future? And then I'll follow that up with basically how do we solve it?
Biggest barrier. I mentioned it before, time. In a consultancy, most of our invoicing is centered around time spent on projects, and that becomes our revenue, and that becomes our profitability. Yep. So if we have people that are normally billable, but then we're asking them to do non-billable things to support innovation, inherently we're reducing our revenue, reducing our profitability. There's a couple things at play here. One is, I actually think about it a little bit differently in that, is it really time, or is it, something you mentioned before, which is we are so client driven, we're so deadline driven that is it more really, instead of time, is it really more prioritization? Because, when we create our to-do lists, what lands at the top is usually, we're trying to prioritize all the time. And often what lands at the top is, the deadline that's coming either tomorrow or next week, and we need to start working to achieve that deadline. So I feel like it's more about how do we assign the same level of priority to innovation at the level, or maybe just slightly below, what we assign for, dedicating our time to our projects and our clients. And it's easier to say than it is to do. On the solutions side, one of the things that we've been trying to do over the last few years is to approach it like a full-on project. So I mentioned before, we do incubation, it's a small investment, and then we do germination, which is a bigger investment. And when we do that germination, we've been shifting more towards writing a proposal where the innovation group is the client, and there's a budget, there's deliverables, there's a schedule, there's milestone markers, check-ins to make sure things are going on track. And there's, a principal in charge, project manager. We're really trying to create the same project environment that we're also used to and driven by on our regular projects. And we've seen a bit more success there with that approach. We've also encountered scenarios where if for some reason the firm is seeing a coalescence of major deadlines and stuff, and we are pinched for resources, we'll have to just pause all of that for a few weeks or a month to get through that hump. But
Yep.
But I think we've been seeing a bit more success with that. It's by no means perfect, but it's the time or the prioritization, I think, is probably for a consultancy one of the biggest hurdles.
Yeah. Do you see an evolution? Because the professional services consultancy business model has changed little to none over 100 years or something like that. Do you see a coming evolution of the way that consulting engineers or design, architecture firms, engineering firms, in a traditional sense? Do you see an evolution coming in the way that they structure their businesses or the way that they serve clients? Maybe even I don't think I want to say deliverables, but that would be a part of it. The way I'll go back, the way that they serve clients.
Yeah, I think what you're hitting on, Jeff, is like historically we're a time-based services delivery model. We, even though sometimes we're working a lump sum, it still comes back to time.
Yeah, tie it back.
The conversations that I've been engaged in recently have been around both internally and externally, has been around value-based service delivery model. And it's I think there's going to be this evolution over the next few years where that is going to be more in play, because as AI starts to be engaged more and more, you would think then our time gets reduced. And so if you follow that along, we're going to be able to do things quicker. And then does that mean that those savings are passed directly back on to the client, and then it's a race to the bottom, as we've heard talked about in different conferences and things like that. So is it going to be purely a race to the bottom, or where we are hoping and what we're working towards is more of the race to the top, which is how do we demonstrate our value to clients such that it's not related to time? And I don't have the answer to that. I wish I could just drop that, do a mic drop moment right now. But it is, I think, what a lot of us are trying to figure out. How do you switch to that value-based proposition?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, as the guy that's been doing a talk called "Commodity Is as Commodity Does" since 2016, so we're what, 9 years in at this point, which is really, a lot of that talk that I do is touches on what you're talking about, right? And there is no silver bullet. That's the answer, but there is a necessity, right? If you don't want to run that race to the bottom, you have to, I like the way you said it, race to the top. You do have to demonstrate your value and create differentiation in the way that you do that. And it's a really, really big question. Maybe I'll have to bring you back at some point. We can dig into that as a topic, because it's a big topic in and of itself.
I'd love to.
Alan, I really appreciate you coming and telling us more about PAE and talking more about that intersection between sustainability and innovation, and what innovation means at PAE, and how you go about fostering it and supporting it, and what it's allowing you to do, not only in-house, but for your brand and for your clients.
Much appreciated, Jeff. I really enjoyed this, and hope to come back and chat more.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you that are listening or watching this, I would say, especially if you watch it, I think I always have in my head that because this started out purely as a podcast, I always have in my head, well, people are listening to this. But we know that over on the YouTube channel, there are people, a lot of people watching these as well, and that's probably the easier place to leave questions and comments and things like that, I suppose. But a couple of things. As Alan and I have been talking, anything that needs a link, that needs a reference, our production team listens to these, they gather these things out, and they put the links to everything that we've talked about into the show notes. So whether you're listening to it on wherever it is that you consume podcasts, or you're watching this on YouTube, just go to the show notes or the description, whatever it's called on your platform, and you can find the links to things that Alan and I talk about. Beyond that, if you have questions or comments, leave them. This may pop up on LinkedIn for you. Leave the questions or comments there. We also watch those, and we allow those questions or comments to guide conversations, or at least topics of conversations in the future. We want to make this as engaging as we possibly can. You heard me say at the beginning, this may have been the first episode where I introduced myself as the executive director of Catalyst. We've rebranded and we're launching our online platform called Catalyst, and that's a place where we're going to be driving lots and lots of engagement around innovation for the built environment topics. Alan is already there because he's part of the Innovation Leaders Mastermind group, and that's going to be growing very, very rapidly. It's going to be the hub of all things innovation for the built environment. So you can certainly leave a question or comment. If it's something that needs to go directly to Alan, I'll send it directly to Alan. But we always appreciate your engagement wherever it is that you're consuming this. So again, thank you for listening to us and or watching us. Again, it's that's for some reason I can't get that part of it through my brain. I'm looking at us, but I'm thinking of listening to us. But we appreciate you showing up for this week after week after week. This is KP Unpacked. It's where the biggest ideas in AEC and AI and innovation all collide. Sometimes they collapse when Jeff fumbles over everything, but it's where everything collides. It is powered by KP Ready Co. It's our mastermind groups, it's our catalysts, it's our advisory services, it's our research team, who you've probably heard some interviews with them by now. But this podcast breaks down the trends, the technology, the discussions, the strategies that are shaping the built environment and beyond. It's really the impetus for a lot of the conversations that are happening around our community. So, Alan, thank you once again, not only for this conversation, but for being a member of our mastermind groups. And as we're recording this, I'm going to see you in a few days in Atlanta. So that'll be fun as well. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted.
I was going to say, my pleasure, Jeff. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Great conversation. I appreciate that. And again, thanks to everybody out there for listening. I'll be back again as I record this. I'll be back again in just a few hours to record some more. As you're listening to this, it'll probably be a week from now. But thank you all for all of your support, and we appreciate all of you, and look forward to drawing you into more conversations as we go along. So see you next week. Thanks, everybody.